Okay, so the first one, this table shows the value of several accounts. So the values of the amount of money in each account. The outlier, remember outlier, I always call it the sleepy kid in class. You know, when you get a class average on tests, it's the one person that scored lower than everybody else. Or it's that really smart kid in class. If you've ever had a class where they gave a grade, a curve to the grade, and somebody like scored way higher than everybody else, but you know that they probably like took the class 3 times, or they're just geniuses as far as math. So the very like the standout piece of data. So with these pieces of data, I have 12,000, 14,000, and obviously it's bigger than that, but just looking at the front couple numbers, our 4,500 is going to be our outlier. So the outlier is removed from the data set. What is the approximate change in the standard deviation? So we have to solve it one time with it in there and then one time without. So if you go to your stat on TI 83 or 84, I'm sorry, and then we're going to hit stat and then we're going to hit edit. I need to clear mine. And then in our L1, we're going to do 16, 8, 20. You're going to put in that data. Make sure you hit enter between each one. So that way it goes down. I think you can actually arrow down as well. But you want to make sure they're not running like one long list of numbers, like left to right. You want to make sure they're up and down. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 data pieces. So we know they're both in. So it's going to be stat, calc, one var stats. That's that first one. We're going to hit enter. And you're going to enter all the way through until it calculates. So remember, our mean is that x bar. Standard deviation is going to be the SX. So with the 4,500 in there, we have 5,333.39. And I just chose, because this is money, to go to pennies. So that's with the 4,500 in there. So we'll go to stat again, hit our list. If we go down to 4,500, you can hit delete, and it'll get rid of that one. So the delete button is right underneath the zoom instead of clear, because if you hit clear, sometimes it'll clear the whole list. So stat, back over to calc, one var stat again. And we're going to enter all the way down. We have our mean of 15,924. And then our standard deviation now is 2,892.60. And it says, is it increasing or decreasing? It is definitely decreasing when we took out the outlier. So we can get rid of our increase, because both increases are no good. And so did it decrease? And now it says approximate. So did it decrease 24, 40, or 1,904? You can take, since it is approximate, I would just take the first couple numbers. So get rid of the decimals so we don't have to worry too much with it. And it's 2441 without your decimals. So then our answer is going to be B. All right, so another comparative data question. So Zach compared his math and science test scores. Which statement is true? So I wouldn't even mess with these yet until I read for highlighted words. So median, we know median is the middle number for each one. So we're going to compare the median all the way down. And then interquartile range, which is Q3 minus Q1 for the science, is higher than that. So all I need, so interquartile range, and then median and interquartile range. Those are the only two things I need to solve for. Now, you can obviously use your calculator if it is calculator active, but there's not very many pieces of data, so we're going to do this one. I'm going to do this one manually, just so you can always keep that in the back of your head and not panic. So we're going to put them in least to greatest, so 72, 74. And if you want to, while you're sitting there, if you want to plug it in your calculator and make sure you can check my math for me, or you could do it manually with me. So we put them in order. So our median score is going to be an 82 for math, right? And then we're going to go into the middle of the upper half and the middle of the lower half. So this Q1 is going to be 73 because that's between 72 and 74. And then our Q3, remember median is also Q2. So our Q3 is going to be between 88 and 100. So you can add those together and divide by 2, which is going to give us 94. IQR is 94 minus 73, which is going to be 21. So our IQR, so this is our median, and our IQR is equal to 21. Now we're going to do the same thing for science. So lowest to highest. So our lowest score is going to be a 64. Uh-oh, that's not good. It's way lower than 72. 64, then 77, then 79, 80, 81, then 82. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Perfect. So we're going to go look for our Q2, so the middle term, which is going to fall between 79 and 80. So it's going to be 79.5. It's going to be in between 79 and 80. Then I'm going to take my upper half, and this is going to be my Q3. So 81, and then my lower half, and it's going to be 77 for my Q1. So 81 minus 77 for our IQR is 4 for science. So science IQR is 4, median is 79.5, math IQR is 21, median is 82, or the Q2, because they are Q1, Q2, Q3. So remember, you're thinking like box and whisker plots is where these are going to, I feel like I'm a visual person, and so those make more sense to me to think about box and whisker plots for these pieces of information. So the first one says the middle for math is higher than that for science. 82 is higher than 79.5, so that's good. But the interquartile range for science is higher than math. So science is 4, math is 21, so that's a no-go. B, the median for science is higher. That's a no-go. We can stop reading right there because it's 79.5. Both the median and interquartile range for math are higher than those for science. Median is 82, which is higher than 79.5. IQR is 21, which is higher than 4, so that looks good. But we're going to check, just because these are EOC questions, that we don't want to miss a silly question. So both the median and interquartile range for science are higher than those for math. And that's not the case because, like we said, 4 is less than 21 and 79.5 is less than 82. So it's not D. So our answer C is correct. And just sort of showing you manually how to do it, because this one could have been an inactive question, because those numbers would be fairly easy to get to, like doing long-handed math. Like you could do those numbers in your head. All right, last EOC question, and hopefully this isn't too far off, but this is actually a released question from the state. So in the EOC packet for Math 1, the function f of x, we'll go ahead and tell you, f of x is the same thing as y. That just means function frank. That's all we got to remember. Is, because we're going to change the equals to the word is, so we don't have to have terrible anxiety about word problems. So these are ways that we can make those easier. Negative 0.25x plus 5. Now, we want to think about y equals mx plus b. Whenever we see it in slope-intercept form, hopefully your brain is starting to pick up with the last couple of days. M is always going to be your slope or rate of change. And b is always going to be your y-intercept. Y-intercept is the word you would use if it was on a graph. It's also your starting point or your starting amount. It is a constant because it has no variable attached to it. And I'm just trying to give you all the different vocabulary words so we don't miss a question because of vocabulary. So remember, slope, rate of change, rise over a run. I didn't give you this one the last time, but coefficient of x is another. It's not as prominent as the ones that I've already named, but coefficient of x is another vocabulary word where they're asking for that m value, that value in front of x, your slope. So coefficient of x, because it is the letter that's the coefficient to the variable x. With that said, it models the height of a candle. X is time, so x is time, that's important, after it is lit. What is the meaning of the y-intercept of the function? And I'm throwing in, like I said, this is a little early, but we're throwing in word problems as soon as possible because obviously this is EOC released. And the more we practice, the better we'll get. So starting point is a key word that I like to always, initial amount, starting point, for word problems. If you can think that word, it's going to make sense to you. So initial height of the candle, what's another word for initial? Like, what does initial mean? Do you know what initial means? Yep. The starting, the first one, right? So the initial. So the starting is another good word. So initial height, so the starting height of the candle. B says the final height of the candle. C says the rate at which the candle is burning. Hopefully you see the word rate. Rate at which. So hopefully you think rate is definitely going to be our M value. So our slope, rate of change. Amount of time it will take the candle to burn. So amount of time, we saw time up there as X. So that means that X, as in literally right here, is time. And everybody has a job. Like X can't also be the slope. The slope is the number in front of X. X in this case is time. So it can't be the candle in inches. And it says the height of the candle. So we'll say inches. It didn't tell us. So we'll pretend like this candle is so many inches tall. And then, so this can't be inches because it is already time. It's established. It can only fit, like you are you. It is it. And we can't assign it more than one job, I think is what I'd like to say. So then our starting point, what do you think is the answer? And hopefully I didn't over talk or make that worse. If you were to have just take your best guess, A, B, C, or D. So is our slope, our y-intercept, the starting height of the candle, the final height of the candle, rate at which the candle is burning, or the amount of time the candle would take to burn out. Okay, so if I was to write this equation as a sentence without discussing a candle, your y-intercept is always, remember we said starting point, so we can write it. So I started with something at 5. We're just saying something at 5 because it's a generic equation. X is whatever we're counting. So like time in this case, because we did say that. So we're going to call this one time. This is my rate of change. Because if we use the word slope, that's not going to really help us talking about candles burning or earning money or pizza toppings on a pizza. So what I always call, and this is kind of silly, and hopefully you've picked up that I like silly stories because it makes it stick in my brain better. Your starting point, I call this the butt-sitting fee or like the non-negotiable. So if you go in to order a cheese pizza, let's say cheese pizzas are $9.99 back in like the 90s, right? And then you would add toppings, so your price would increase. Or you sat into a cab, and if you've ever been in a cab or any like Ubers or any of those, it has a flat rate to pick you up, and then they charge by the distance. So the rate of change would be that. So in this case, this starting point is going to be the starting point of the candle that is going to burn at 0.25, because that's that negative, so it's going to get smaller per second. So it's going to burn a quarter of an inch per second if we called if the 5 indeed, like if we were measuring in inches. So it's going to burn down. We know it's going down because of the negative per second, because it said second, the starting amount. So the answer for this one is A. And I over-explained it because I wanted to make sure you knew what every part was, because they're not always going to ask for the y-intercept. They will talk about your slope. Your slope is usually, in most sentences, it'll say $1.25 per topping. 0.25 inches per second. So whatever, if it says per or each time or each topping, so think about the words they're using. It's usually attached. And when we start really doing word problems, we're going to highlight. So if you have highlighters, I would go find those now. So that way when we get into word problems, you have them just to make your life a little easier. All right, perfect. So those are our 3 EOC questions. Hopefully you hang on to those, guys, and they weren't too hard. As I said, my theory on EOC questions is we start beating ourselves over the head early, so that way it doesn't hurt as much when we get it, when it comes swinging for you on that day. Because the quality of the questions, the math itself, you guys have done before. The verbiage of their questions are pretty legit, so we want to practice. All right, so slope-intercept form, that's y equals mx plus b. And I've said it 100 times already today alone. What is m in slope-intercept form? Give me one word for M. Any word you want, whichever one you remember. Hopefully in the last couple of days you've realized you need 2 things to write the equation of a line. This never goes away, like ever. For the rest of your high school and math career. Yes, slope. So this is going to be our slope. Also known as rate of change, because I'm going to repeat them all. Coefficient of x. Rise over run, because You will pick one you like, but you need to attach them because it just depends on the style of the question because they can ask you lots of questions. So if that's the slope, what is B? What's this number going to be? Y-intercept. So if we're just doing the basics of linear equations, you would use slope and y-intercept. Another word for the y-intercept would be starting amount, starting point, constant, because it is the number without an x attached to it. Now, hopefully I'm not overwhelming you, but again, the more you hear it, I feel like the better. Y is always going to be your output. It is dependent on what value you plug in for x. X is what we control. So it is independent. We are independent. We make decisions. So when we decide what value to plug in for x, that will change our y value. And then it's also, so if y is our output, this is our input because we are plugging it in to an equation. And hopefully that also helps you remember independent and dependent variables. So independent input is inside the equation. It's what you can control. Y is dependent on all the fun things and parts of that equation. And again, as I said earlier on the last question, the EOC question, as I just named all those things, each one of them are that thing. Like they can't, like I said, slope is not 2x. Slope would be 2 if there was a 2 there. It is just the m value. X is going to be just the input. It's the x value you decide to plug into the equation in the future. So when given the two things you have to write the equation of a line is a slope and a y-intercept. So we have y equals, we know slope is m, and then y-intercept is b. So we're going to put a 3 here. We know m is our slope, so you're going to put a -2 here, and you're done. So if given slope and y-intercept, which I will be very honest, they're not going to do that on your EOC. You have to interpret it because you should have ideally learned this already. But, you know, summers happen, years happen between classes, terrible teachers, horrible memories, all that fun stuff. So slope goes with the x because it's a coefficient of x. And then your y-intercept is your b value in y equals mx plus b on the end. Okay? So x is our input, y is our output, x is independent, y is dependent. Again, those are helpful when we start getting into word problems, the independent and dependent. Now, what are the two things we just said that you need to write the equation of a line? Yep, slope and good. Y-intercept. Excellent, excellent, excellent. And the y-intercept means where does the line touch the y-axis? So make sure we're going slow enough for our brain or we're taking the time because once you get the hang of it, super easy. Unless you think it's too easy, then you're going to miss it. So y-axis, y-intercept. So in this case, that's a -2 right there. And I'm going to go ahead and go over here and do it so I don't get distracted because y'all know I get distracted. And a +3. So that's our y-intercept. We have to count our slope. I did notice a lot of people writing the equation from the graph in the delta from y'all's class skipped that last week. And I'm not sure if it was because the day it was assigned or if we didn't know what we're doing. So if you need to ask me a question, drop it in the chat box. You know, ask the question because we need to know. This should be very, very easy, ideally, in comparison to other things you're going to have to take to EOC. So we want to make sure we get it right. So we're looking for good intersections, like perfect intersections. And this one looks like this is going to be my next good intersection, and this is going to be my next good intersection. So where it crosses at a cross point. So rise over run, we're going to rise 2, and we're going to run 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if we're traveling towards the line, that's a -5. So 2 over -5. And as I mentioned last week, if you wanted to count down 2, and to the right 5, that would still be a -2 over a +5, which makes our slope negative. And our line is from left to right decreasing, so it's going down. So negative line, this is math. The mathy teacher answer is as x increases, y decreases. So y gets smaller as x gets bigger, means it's a negative line. So if the reading from left to right, it going down is confusing, think about as x gets bigger, what is happening to my y values? That's where that negative sign is going to come into play. So that's my slope. We know our y-intercept is at -2. And we're going to put it into y equals, that's our m value, x minus b. Or you could put plus -2 because adding a negative is the same thing as subtracting 2. So now you've written the equation of that line. Ta-da, slope-intercept form. Okay? Just because I want to make sure we're keeping up. Is x input or output? Good. Input. X is input because it's inside slope-intercept form. There are other forms of linear equations. There's standard form. There's all that good fun stuff. I personally love this form, slope-intercept form, because I can do more with and answer more questions with it. Because like I've said, I've already thrown a ton of vocabulary to you. You can do input, output, slope, starting point. What rate is the candle changing its height? How big was the candle when I bought it? Or, whatever. Conversationally, y equals mx plus b is a lot easier to manipulate, especially at our level of math. So I always, if there's anything linear, I try to get it into that format. And so then that makes those things start to ring true. So as long as you can move and isolate variables like we did in literal equations, hashtag everybody's favorite, otherwise known as not, then you should be able to answer all these questions and memorize them as to where they are located as well. Could probably help you as well. All right, so number 4, we have our y-intercept of 3. So I'll go ahead and write him out here. He's a positive 3. We need to count our slope. So we want to look for good intersections. That's a good intersection. That's a good intersection. And then we're going to count up and over. And obviously our red dot is a good intersection. So we're going to count up 2. So that's positive. And then to the right 3. Perfect. If I wanted to count down, if your brain works that way, so -2 to the left 3. Remember, negative on top of a negative, so negative division is still going to give us a positive. So what's the slope of this line? Ooh, close. What's my rise? How much did I rise up to get over to that red dot from the first yellow dot? Yep, we rose 2. Rise over. How far did I run? Good. Ran 3. Perfect. So y equals rise over run, x, because it's the coefficient of x, plus b. And in this case, b is positive, so it stays positive. And Eli, good call out to do the -3 over 3 so I could answer that. I think I see what you're doing. I think you're looking at, so we want to look at one set of stairs. So this is my first stair. And I would probably, if I were you on your paper, as I'm doing this zigzag thing, I wouldn't do that. If you're an up and over, I would continue up and over. Same here. If you're a down and over, do the next one down and over. Don't switch it. I'm just showing you because each one of y'all's brains works a little different. Both ways will get you to the right answer. But whatever way you use, I would pick one. I wouldn't do both. As far as like counting up first and then to the right, or down first and then to the left. Because I think you're picking up these two numbers. Maybe. All right. I'm going to keep moving. Different kinds. Because you're going to have more practice. But we want to get through as many as possible. And I need you to tell me what's the hardest part. So I know where to really like hone in on class. Okay. All right. So the next one. These are in standard form. So we need to put it into slope-intercept form. So standard form, if you notice, that equal marks, we got x and y on the same side. Highly recommend, hear me out, please. Great divide line is going to help you because you are going to magically think you got this nailed and make silly mistakes. And if I was sitting in front of you and I could ask you questions while you were doing it, if I ask you the question, you will answer me right. By yourself and your pencil to paper, you will start making things up because you think you got it licked. And you probably do, but you just start skipping steps. All right, so I need y by itself because I need it in y equals mx plus b form. So if I want y by itself, what is over on the side with y that needs to move? That's outside my box. Yep. Positive 8x. Yes, Eli, there is a negative attached to that y, but think of that as a -1, and we're going to deal with that in a minute. We're going to deal with whatever's on the outside first, because that -1 and y are pretty close together. So I always I think I've told you the story already when we're solving equations. So if you've ever, and I probably think this way because I used to teach at alternative schools. So if you've ever been into a classroom or anywhere or seen where there's a fight in a classroom, if I'm the teacher and I'm coming through the front door of the classroom, and the fight is obviously not usually at the front door. If the teacher's standing at the front door, it's usually further away. You don't most students don't fight where there's somebody to grab them. So you're going to move every person besides the two that are like locked up in a fight first. So if there's anything going on around it, get to those guys out of the way first. Again, sorry, that's probably like a really, I try to make them happy, fun stories. That's not really a happy, fun story. That's more like I taught it in alternative school a lot. Fun story. So we're going to move that 8x. It is a positive 8x, so we're going to subtract 8x. Now, it is an 8 and an x, and they're attached. Remember, we are shooting for y equals mx plus b form. So if that feels funny, remember, that's our mx. So he's good. He's rocking and rolling. So I have minus y equals, and I'll write 0, minus 8x, just so we're holding on to everything. But hopefully you know that 0 is not, it doesn't hold a place. But you do want to make sure you hold on to that minus with that 8x because it's now become negative because it switched sides of the Great Divide. Now the negative in front of it, in front of that y, like I said, we can think of that as a negative 1. How am I going to get the negative 1 off of the y? What operation would get negative 1 off the y? Ooh! Y'all is wild. I love you. I love you. So remember, this is negative 1 times y because they're attached to each other. They're multiplying. They're making more problems for each other. So since that's multiplication, how are we going to move it? Good. So we're going to divide by negative 1. Each thing. Again, that 0 makes this a little complicated. 0 divided by anything is going to be 0. So we can get rid of that. That negative 8 divided by a negative 1. A negative and a negative are going to give me a what? Good. So then I have 8x. Because that took care of that little minus in the front. These guys took care of their self. It became a positive 1 in front of that y because any number divided by self is a positive 1. So I now have y equals 8x. Stop. Here's the fun part. So what is my slope in this equation? Y equals 8x. What is my slope? Good. Because remember, slope is m, and it's attached to the x always. Good job, Eli. Get rid of your x. And everyone does it. So slope is just the m, not 8x. X is your input. X is independent. X is its lone rider. It does what it wants to do. It does its own thing. M is slope. And if it helps, think about like if you're sitting at a desk with somebody or if you have a brother and sister and we say, which one of you is Eli? And I grab, obviously you're like, me, not you and so-and-so. So like we're looking at our class, not two of you are Eli. So again, the X and the M are separate letters. So think of them as separate things. So your slope is going to be 8. What's our y-intercept? This one's a trick question. Slightly. Ooh, I like it. Not right, but I like it. It's not a terrible answer. Not a terrible answer. Anybody else got one? So in y equals mx plus b form, it would be right here, right? Is there anything there? Yes, it's 0. Good, because there's nothing there. Or if you want to think 0 divided by negative 1 is 0, so had we written it out, it would have looked like this. So the y-intercept is 0. But in equation writing, that doesn't usually exist. This is not there. So if there is no constant, no number without a variable attached, the y-intercept is 0. That means it's going to cross that graph at 0, 0, because that's the y-intercept, the x value will always be 0. And then another good vocabulary word, this is the origin of your graph. So that's right here, if you can see it on the screen. So that means this line is gonna go right there. And then because it has an 8x, that graph's not big enough, so I can't do it. But we would count up 8 over 1. Up 8 over 1, because all whole numbers have an imaginary 1 underneath it. Luckily, because we're virtual and the EOC is on the computer, you're never going to have to plot points like that. But if you needed to match the graph, if you look at the graph, that slope, it would have crossed through the origin, counted up 8 into the right 1. That is a positive slope, so it would increase, so go up. The x values increase, so will the y values. So it will be a positive line like this, just much steeper because it's up 8 over 1, up 8 over 1. So it's going up a lot faster than it's rising faster than it runs. Okay, all right, we're going to do the next one. And y'all are going to think I'm crazy for saying this. I know there's apps out there, and I know people use them. I can see how much time you use for each question in Delta. I can tell me how much time you use for each question in IXL. If there are cheater apps that you have become friends with, please, I am begging you, don't use them for this, because you will put yourself so far behind on EOC day if you don't have the ability to move these around. And as long as you use the cheat app, you don't know that you don't have the ability until day is, we're in the corner and it's fire day and we have to show everybody what we know. And that is not the day to realize you don't understand. The day to realize you don't understand is any day you can get help. If it's quiz day, I got it. You got to get them right. You're going to do what you need to do. I understand some days we don't want to do math. Trust me to your math future, because we are freshmen in Math 1. This skill is very important to be able to isolate what they're asking for, because you will start dealing with more kinds of functions in the future, and the process is still the same. So solving for equations, literal equations, and moving to slope-intercept form. So again, this is standard form because x and y are on the same side. Standard form, x and y are on the same side. Slope-intercept, we want to get it in y equals mx plus b. And it's called slope-intercept because the slope is easily identified and your y-intercept is easily identified. So I got my y. Who am I going to move first, and how am I going to move him? Good. How am I going to move that 2x? Good. We're going to subtract it because it's positive. 2x minus 2x. And you actually subtract it because it's positive. And the reason you chose subtraction, your only option will be subtraction or addition, because it is added to the 5y. Okay? That's why. It's in front of it, but it is attached to our fighting little roll-it-up group of people here by addition. So 10 and negative 2x are not like terms. So we're going to write them just as is. And that might bother you in that order. The reason I write them in that order first is because of the minus, and I don't want to lose it. And if I put it in the front, a lot of students write positive 2x plus 10, but that's a negative. So I keep them in the order as I move them, like I just start tacking everything onto the back, and then I'll switch it around when I'm done. Now we're looking at y. We need to get that by itself. What's attached to the y that needs to move, and how are we going to move it? What's the inverse operation to undo 5y? Good. Divide by 5, because that's 5 times y. So we're going to divide by 5. We're going to do it to each one. We talked about that last week. You're doing it to each one because a lot of like your literal equations, they did not write it out twice. They wrote it over once, but that was because that's all you can do. In this case, we want things in a rise over run format for your slope, and you want a y-intercept. So you want to address each one as it's different. I'm going to put the slope first because y equals mx plus b is what we like. So that's going to be that negative 2 over 5 x. And then 10 divided by 5 is going to give me 2. Now, brace yourself. Here's a good question, but you got to think. All right, you ready? What is the rise of our slope? What is the rise of the slope? Good, negative 2. Negative 2. The slope is indeed negative 2 over 5. Sorry, m is negative 2 over 5 because it's mx plus b, and it's rise over run. So the rise is negative 2. Awesome. And then, so what is the run? Good, good, good. And it seems like a silly question, but again, these are going to get so easy where you're going to mess up on the silly questions, and we don't want to mess up on the easy questions. So I think we probably already know, what is our y-intercept, or our b value in this case, or our starting point? What is our starting point? Good, that positive 2 at the back. Positive 2 at the back. Nice. The two things you have to write linear equations are slope and y-intercept. You have to have an m and you have to have a b. Is y an input or output? Is y an input or output? Output. Good, 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 good. Output, because it's on the outside when in slope-intercept form. All right, ready? One more question. It's going to be fun. I like it. I love vocabulary questions because you don't have to solve math for them. Which letter is independent? We're looking at y equals mx plus b. Which letter is independent? Yes. Good. input is independent. And that's, like I said, it's going to matter a lot more for word problems. But when you get to word problems, you guys shut down on me. So we're going to try to get that little portion in our brain quick. All right, I got 3 minutes. So this is the part where we mess up a lot. A lot of students panic. Don't panic. Biggest thing, don't panic. So we're going to write it in slope-intercept form. Y equals mx plus b. I've asked it 100 times. You've answered me 100 times. We need the slope and we need the y-intercept, right? We need the slope and the y-intercept. Well, they gave me a coordinate and a slope. So slope is good. So we can jump on that guy. So we know that's going to go in the place of x. I'm sorry, of m. Ooh, listen to me. Of m. And then I don't have a y-intercept. So I know that we're going to leave b. Okay? Now, the wild fun, mathy fun part is with that coordinate, that means I have an input and an output. Because a coordinate is x and then y, right? So I have an x, a y, and a slope. The only thing I'm missing is my b value. So I'm going to put a 2 in the place of y. And I'm going to put that -3 in the place of x. And then we're going to have to solve for b. Okay? So we're solving for b at this case, in this instance. So -7/3 times 3. -7/3 times a -3, and we'll put it over 1 because all whole numbers are over 1. And when you multiply fractions, just as a reminder, you're going to work straight across the top and straight across the bottom. What is a -7 times a -3? Negative and a negative. And hopefully you can do it without a calculator. If not, pull out your calculator. We'll get there. Ooh, negative and a negative give me a good positive 21. And then 3 times 1 gives me what? Yes. All right. Perfect. What is 21 divided by 3? Because I can't reiterate enough. All a fraction is, as scared of them as we are, is division. Yes. Excellent. 21 divided by 3 is 7. So now I have 2 equals, we just did this math over here, 7 plus b. I need b by itself because that's the part I'm missing to write it in the right form. How am I going to move that 7? I'm getting lazy. I didn't do my big, great divide. Yep. We're going to subtract 7 because it's positive. What is 2 minus 7? So you had $2, but you spent 7. So what does that mean? Where are we sitting at that point? Good. -5. I'm flinging my pens around. Equals b. So b is equal to -5. So what does that mean to our slope-intercept form of our equation? What number is that -5? What is that? Is that the input, the output, the y-intercept, or the slope? What is that -5 going to be? Good, y-intercept. So we did all this math. We're not done yet. The things that are important, and this is when I'm a highlighter fan, because again, I'll say it 100 times and probably 100 more. As you've already well noticed, I have the attention span of a squirrel. I will lose a page full of math, the things I need. You need your slope, and you need your y-intercept. So we haven't actually answered the question yet until we write y equals -7/3 x minus 5. Or again, plus a -5. Because that's putting that into slope-intercept form. All right, my beautiful people. You're amazing. It's 3:45.